Well, thank you, everyone. So nice to be here once again in Zoom land with all of you. So I'm continuing on the Lotus Sutra. I want to begin with the liturgy introducing the sutra. So we do that. The unsurpassed and profound and sublime Dharma is difficult to encounter even in a billion eons. Today we receive, hear, and uphold it, vowing to fathom to the true meaning of the Tathagata. You know, it's interesting in that opening liturgy, when it talks about even in billions of eons, that's really very much in line with the Lotus Sutra, because there are these astounding numbers which really are beyond conception. Well, I'd like to begin with a short verse from Dogen, Eihei Dogen, who was, as many people know, the founder of Soto Zen in Japan, and a great lover and proponent of the Lotus Sutra. So this is just as a simple verse from the last volume of the Eihi Koruku, and a long 10-volume work of his, but this is a simple poem which says, "How delightful mountain dwelling, so solitary and tranquil. Because of this, I always read the Lotus Blossom Sutra with wholehearted vigor under the trees. What is there to love or hate? How enviable sound of evening rains in deep autumn." So this is the kind of verse I could say, well, that's it. That's my talk. That sort of covers everything. You know, there was this story of a Zen master who was about to give a talk, and then he heard a bird tweeting, and he didn't put down his whisk. And when the bird stopped, he just left the zendo. And that actually expresses the spirit of the Lotus Sutra that I'd like to convey, this idea that the Lotus Sutra is showing us things. It's not telling us in really understandable conceptual terms. It's a much greater dynamic enterprise. So today, what I'm going to talk about, unusually enough, usually I do one chapter per session. A couple times I've done 2 chapters, but today I'm doing 3, chapters 15, 16, and 17, because they all tell one story, if you like. They're all kind of a continuation of the same theme. And in order to do that, I'm going to have to do a number of things. One, I'm going to explain what has happened, not by going chapter by chapter, but just the highlights of the teachings of the first 4 chapters. And I also have to talk a little bit about the structure of the whole sutra as a whole. Many of you may know this. It's not the most common fact, but the sutra is divided, certainly by Jur-E, who lived in the 6th century, into 2 major parts, which are called the trace and the origin. And the trace part is the first 14 chapters. That can be broken down in other ways too, but basically Shakyamuni Buddha as a human being on the earth. It's basically about the Shakyamuni that we have learned about from studying the Dharma for so long, who was born a prince, left home, studied with many different masters, and sat under the Bodhi tree and attained highest perfect enlightenment and taught for 45 years, and then he passed into parinirvana. This is the story that we have known. You know, most of us, especially I started in the Theravadan tradition a long time ago, and that's certainly the way it's portrayed. The next set of chapters, 15 to 28, show a different kind of Shakyamuni, who is more universal in space and time. And we'll get into the mechanics of that and see what has changed. What is the sutra trying to tell us now? So let's first talk about the what has happened so far. So from the introduction to chapter 14, here are some of the things that we have found out that are mind-blowing, right? That even at this point, things that have turned our view of Buddhism and of the Buddha upside down. So we first encounter the Buddha in the introductory chapter, where he emits a light from his urna. And that's the mark right here, space between his eyebrows. And he illuminates tens of thousands of realms, basically the whole universe. This is something we haven't seen in the Pali Canon at all. And we get to see how everybody is practicing Dharma more or less throughout all the realms, from the lowest hells to the highest heavens. And even here, we're starting to see some things that are unusual, to say the least. We hear about an earlier Buddha, much earlier, even before Dipankara, who also emitted the light from his urna and preached what we're going to find out is the Lotus Sutra. Even though the teaching is not exactly articulated in the way that we might expect, where it would say, this is the teaching of the Lotus Sutra. The Lotus Sutra teaches by different ways. It's not that explicit, but we're clued in that this is going to happen. So, and we also, so in the Pali Canon, there really is one Buddha. It's understood that there were Buddhas preceding Shakyamuni, but they're really not spoken about in any way in particular, except Maitreya, who actually in this introductory chapter is prophesied to be the next Buddha. And it's Manjushri, not Shakyamuni, who actually says that. And that in itself is also unusual. So then we learn that the Buddha teaches by expedient means. And the Buddha realizes that his wisdom cannot be imparted to us ordinary sentient beings in any real understandable form. He can only approach us according to our interest and our attainment and our abilities. And so things are not going to be the way we think that, and we're going to get a different view of things according to our understanding. And this is really explored in chapter 5, where the Dharma is understood to rain that comes down on all types of plants, little plants, shrubs, bushes, great trees, and all receive the Dharma according to their capacity. And we also hear things in this sutra which do echo the Pali Canon about the Buddha's reluctance to teach at first, because teaching is so subtle and profound. We also see Sariputra's cluelessness. Sariputra was the wisest of all arhats, the arhats being the ones who had attained the highest enlightenment in the mainstream, the Pali Canon tradition. But as in many other Mahayana sutras, Sariputra seems to have a lot to learn. And another thing that we start to see in the sutra is that it is taking away from us everything that we think we've had and we think we've held on to. And so there's an analogy in my mind between how the sutra works and the teaching of Madhyamaka from Nagarjuna. So Madhyamaka philosophy is really deconstructing everything that we understand, the way our minds work, anything that we can hold on to, our definitions of good, of bad, of pain and pleasure, of man and woman. All of these are disassembled in Nagarjuna's very careful analysis and deconstruction. The Lotus Sutra does this also, and examples and various types of verse. I hope you can hear me. Says this, my connection's unstable, but I'm going to continue. So anyway, and then of course, also in the first part of the sutra, we encounter the one vehicle. And that is a teaching which includes all of the earlier teachings of the Shravakas, the practitioners of the early Pali Canon, Prateka Buddhas, the solitary Buddhas who reach a certain level of enlightenment but don't teach, and even the Bodhisattvas who are on the Buddha path. But all of those somehow are suspended or included in the teaching of the one vehicle. And as I said in my last talk, and I continue to say, I think that what the one vehicle is mind itself. And mind cannot be defined adequately, and what one has just proved to be untrue or inadequate in many different situations. And what good is a definition of mind going to do us? And it's really about how we experience the world. And the other thing that we've learned throughout these first 14 chapters is that everyone will reach Buddhahood, and that there is a hidden jewel that we all have that's shown in chapter 8. There's a parable of a man who is drunk, and his friend cares about him and sews a priceless jewel into his robe. The man doesn't know it, and he wanders around in poverty for years until the original person, who of course is the Buddha, finds him and says, "You had this treasure all along. You just didn't know it." So this is the incipient teaching of Buddha nature. Buddha nature, as the phrase is enunciated, doesn't appear in the sutra, but as many commentators have stated, Buddha nature really is expressed in the Lotus Sutra. Also, as I said, the last chapter I did, chapter 14, that had the parable of the top knot in the general's on the general's head that has this great jewel, and there is some indication that that jewel, the passing of that jewel, might be Vairocana, the or Adibu, who is the center and emanation of the entire universe, because there are kind of esoteric and tantric elements in the Lotus Sutra. Okay, so now we are about to go into the next chapters. And in order to do that, because I have to mention that in chapter 11, and I hope I hope some of you are following this. I know it's going around and it's a little bit like Game of Thrones. The plot is so complicated, but if you'll bear with me, in chapter 11, we have one of the most remarkable things in the sutra, a jeweled stupa arising, jumping out of the earth, and to the awe of all the bodhisattvas who are witnessing it. And the Buddha calls all of his emanations in to the to witness that has Prabhuta Ratna, this ancient Buddha, in it. And the Buddha steps in and is seated next to Prabhuta Ratna. All fourfold assembly and the bodhisattvas who have come can see the Buddha's body. This is really a remarkable kind of event. Interesting to compare this with the Diamond Sutra, whereas many of you'll know there's a passage which says, "He who seeks the Buddha in sound, his ways are perverted, and he will not see the Tathagata." So here we have people who are seeing the Tathagata, but they're seeing not the Nirmanakaya, not the manifestation on the earth. They're seeing either his reward body, the Sambhodhakaya, or the Dharmakaya, the essential Buddha nature that is beyond our senses. important to all these connect. So that, and what happens in that sutra, in that particular chapter, is the assembly wants to see what's going on because the stupa has arisen into the air. And so everybody is lifted up into the air. So if you're listening to this and you start to feel lightheaded, it's because we're all standing in midair anyway. So, and the Buddha, as each of them, to expound this sutra is to see me in the verse, is to see me. And it's very much like in the Pali canon where it says, someone understands praticca samutpada, causes and conditions, that person will see the Buddha, just in that understanding. And now just to get us up to chapter 15, remember we've heard the story in chapter 12 of Devadatta and the dragon. Our ideas of good and bad upside down, Devadatta being the most evil person in all the sutras. He's somehow the savior of the Buddha. And the dragon princess, who is an animal, an 8-year-old, and a woman, becomes a Buddha instantly. And then there is prophecy of Buddhahood for the Buddha's mother and former wife, and then the vows of all the bodhisattvas to propagate the Lotus Sutra. And once again, it's worth repeating that the Lotus Sutra doesn't have a self, and this propagation of the Lotus Sutra is complicated. It's words because we speak of the li, the profound principle, which is within the sutra but not visible. Words are also none other than, so you really don't have any standpoint to accept or dismiss it. You have to encounter the sutra, and I mentioned chapter 14, where the practice for the bodhisattvas is narrowed down to body, speech, mind, and vows, and of course the jewel in the top knot. Before I get into chapter 15, I thought this might be a good time for me to tell a joke, since I've just given normal material, right? And the joke, I hope, will be very relevant. One of my favorite Jewish jokes, and it explains about, or it demonstrates, revelatory nature coming in a unexpected guise. So, in a particular story, there is a man who has gone into a restaurant, a very old restaurant in Brooklyn, where he's gone for the last 30 years, and he's ordered soup, and he has had the same waiter for 30 years. His waiter is named Schwartz, and Schwartz gives him the soup, and the man says to him, "Schwartz, come over here," which Schwartz does. He's a good waiter. And the man says to him, "Schwartz, I'd like you to take the soup." Now, this is unusual, right? You don't usually ask a waiter over to taste your food, but this is a good customer. It's a long time. And he does. And Schwartz says, "I'm not going to taste your food. I'm your waiter." And the gentleman who's dining said, "I've been here for 30 years, right? I'm not asking you to do too much. You really owe it to me. I want you to taste the soup." This goes back and forth with Schwartz just rejecting the whole idea. Finally, he sees he has no choice, and he says, "Okay, I'll taste your soup." And then he says to the diner, "Where?" And the diner goes, "Aha." So now think about it. The diner could have said, "Hey, you forgot to give me a spoon." But he doesn't do that. He wants the waiter to have, and once again, a very minor revelation. And in the language of the Lotus Sutra, if you take that metaphor of having something dawn on you in a kind of peripheral way, and you multiply it by thousands and millions and billions of metaphors, you get some idea how the Lotus Sutra works. So now we can embark on chapter 15. And this is really a mind-boggling revelation. Chapters 15, 16, and 17 are now taking us one step, and actually many, many steps further from our understanding of who the Buddha is, what he has done, what his teachings are. All of these are going to be thrown in disarray. So the chapter with all of these bodhisattvas who've come in 11, they've come from other worlds, and they exceed 8 times the number of Ganges sands. And they offer their services. They offer to preach the Lotus Sutra in the Saha world. And Saha means endurance in Sanskrit. So this is the world of suffering. We're enduring this world. But they reach everywhere into the Saha world of suffering and after the Buddha's extinction. And this is a very important thing, a very important theme that has gone throughout the Lotus Sutra until now. The Buddha's extinction, the Buddha passing out of his role in Buddhahood. It's a very hard thing for us to understand, because even in ordinary highest perfect enlightenment, one transcends birth, and you are at one with the unborn and the uncreated and the deathless. So it doesn't make sense that a Buddha would die. But one way of understanding this is that extinction is out of the realm of distinction. So the Buddha is taking on a different role. And then we also see Prabhuta Ratna, who was present in the stupa, which we saw earlier. So now the Buddha, I'm sure he was impressed by all the bodhisattvas and was grateful for their help, but he says there is no need to uphold the Lotus Sutra. For you to uphold it, for you bodhisattvas who've come from so far. And why is that? And he says, I have 60 millions of billions of Maha Bodhisattvas who have retinue in that enormous number. And as followers, their own Shravakas, their own bodhisattvas who are in a state of learning or have nothing more to learn. And Shakyamuni says, these men, these will do it after my extinction. And so, and then what happens, as soon as the Buddha speaks, and this is comparable and perhaps even more astonishing than the rise the stupa in the air. I mean, imagine anyone who's seen encounters of the third kind, with the space in the air. This stupa must have been much more astonishing. And hopefully I'll talk a little bit about the symbolism of the stupa. But he speaks to these bodhisattvas who've come from a long way off. And all of a sudden, springing out of the earth, Yung Chu in Chinese, they spring out of the earth, incalculable trillions of bodhisattva molecules. They have gold-hued bodies, and they have the 32 marks, and they emit this incredibly bright light as well. And it is explained that they have previously lived in an open space between the Saha world, and they sprung up when they heard the Shakyamuni's voice, Buddha Shakyamuni. We'll talk about this a little bit more. What could that mean, being in a space in the world, sort of under the world? How are we going to understand that? Hopefully I will get to that. So, these Buddhas fill the open air, incalculable billions of leaders, superior conduct, limitless conduct, pure conduct, and firm practice. Now, it's interesting, in China, they all have names ending with Xing, which means conduct, means practice, means action. So there's Shang Xing, and there's Wu Bian Xing, and Jing Xing, and Anli Xing. All to mind, that's a clue that what we're encountering here is not just the of these bodhisattvas, but we're actually encountering the essence of the Lotus Sutra itself, as it's presented in the form of these beings. And so these beings reveal that they've been dwelling up in space. They have tamed their minds, but the other bodhisattvas, the ones who have come from other lands, are just gobsmacked by the emergence of these bodhisattvas, and they want to know who are they, and what sutras do they read, and how they actually come to be there, where the calculations of the sutra start to become rather remarkable. So she explains that these are my disciples, these are my bodhisattvas, and I have trained them for eons. And that's how I have gained this remarkable appearance and achieved this remarkable attainment. So a bit of simple math. Maitreya and the bodhisattvas have some doubts in their minds. They recount the tale of Buddha, which I went over, of the Buddha leaving home and teaching for X number of years. And actually, at the narrative level when this sutra takes place, it's the Buddha is well into his 70s. And as I may have mentioned before, we have some idea that the seeds of the sutra may have existed in as early as 150 BCE. The first Chinese translation is 286 by Dharma Raksha, and the famous one by Kumarajiva, which we're all using, is not until 406 AD. So, we're trying to place this in history, and we're placing this in spiritual history, and we're trying to stay on a spiritual faith-based level. So many different levels of understanding are going on as we encounter the sutra. So Maitreya does the math, and he comes up with about 45 years. And how can you possibly train anyone for eons, billions and billions of years, if you've only had 45 years to do it? So this is when, and they give this wonderful analogy. It's like a 100-year-old man pointing to a 25-year-old man saying, "This is my father." It just does not compute logically. And I think that's hard to argue with, right? But we're working in another dimension here. And they say if this isn't explained, doubts will arise. And that's the end of chapter 15. And if I left it there, I'd really be leaving you with a cliffhanger, right? You wouldn't know what happened, right? So I can't do that. So I have to reveal what happened. So now we're in chapter 16. And of course, it is sort of funny talking about this as chapters, because these are events. Imagine if in our life you had breakfast and your partner said, well, that was chapter 10. You're going to work and now it's chapter 11. And you'll come home, that'll be chapter 12. You know, we don't organize our experience in our lives like that. Or reading a sutra, and this is how it's arranged. One second. The Buddha repeats 3 times, you should believe and have faith and understand of the Buddha's true, sincere words. And many times, and the bodhisattvas comply. And the Buddha then talks about the power of this secret supernatural penetration of the thus come one. The Buddha's extraordinary powers are, as it's explained even in the second chapter of the sutra, are beyond our understanding, our comprehension, our experience. And you know, and they've talked about in detail about the Buddha's life, and the Buddha concurs with their understanding. But he says, however, O sons of virtuous family, immeasurable, limitless, hundreds, thousands of kotis, of mayutas, of kalpas, and that would break any calculator that you have. You can't even enter the number. They have passed. They have actually passed since I attained Buddhahood. So now the Buddha says, if people come, I'll use the Buddha eye, his great penetration, to assess their roots, whether they're keen or dull, and see their receptiveness to salvation. So wherever I am, my names may change, the age I declare may change, and I may say I'm entering nirvana, but I also may not say that for certain of the people who are hearing me. And he says, I teach the profound and wonderful Dharma skillfully and cause sentient beings to be happy. And this is, I like to think of how long it took the bodhisattvas to process this. This is this sort of turns over everything that they but this is, as the Lotus Sutra will show, this is really quite good news. It reinforces the teaching of our reaching Buddhahood, all sentient beings. It shows the oneness of the teachings and the Buddha in many ways. It's and it shows how the Buddha's expedient means are accessible to us, that we can have faith, that we can understand the teachings on whatever level that we are. And that's really important. It's one of the things, it's like a driving force that goes throughout the sutra, because most of us are going to find things that are really beyond our comprehension in the sutra. And the sutra is the first one to say that's fine. There's you can't possibly understand this. And the second chapter explains doing any kind of thing that recognizes that there is a Buddha path and that you are suffering, even so much shapes in the sand or nodding your head, any kind of turning towards the Dharma is being on the Buddha. And the Buddha says, I know the marks of the threefold world, our world of desire, the world of form, where the devas live, and the formless world, where the highest devas live, who actually have no corporeal bodies. So he said, there's no birth or death for me. I don't retreat from entry to the world. And so pass into extent, pass into in ways through the Dharma teaching or through myself, I am there. And so the Buddha doesn't see the threefold world, the triple sphere from our viewpoint. And so the Buddha says he makes no errors because sentient beings have different natures, desires, conducts, different thinking. And so I use parables and various expressions so that I enable sentient beings to have good roots. And my work, the Buddha's work, never stops. And then, now this is really quite interesting, and you really have to contemplate this. So the Buddha doesn't just leave it there and say, well, that way, he said, what is the reason? Why did I appear to leave the world? So he says that if I see the world, those of thin virtue, no wholesome roots, low and mean, attached to the five desires, they would enter into they might be arrogant or envious and fall into a variety of unwholesome states. And the Buddha states all of the Buddha's teachings are for saving sentient beings. So the Buddha, this is the last parable in the sutra. So there's a fine physician who knows to make good medicine, and he has 10 or 20 or 100 sons. I always find this interesting in the Lotus Sutra. That was also in the 3rd chapter of the burning house about the number of sons, 10, 20, 100, 500. It's interesting. The numbers can get vague and something like that. But anyway, so there is this physician, and his business takes him to another land. And the sons take some other poisonous medicine which depresses and disorders their mind. And they start writhing on the ground. And the father returns, and he has an antidote. And some of the sons drink it and some don't. They're all overjoyed to see worshipfully. And they say, you know, we've foolishly taken this poison. Please heal us and give us back our lives. This is when the father comes up with the antidote. He finds herbs and he prepares them, and these herbs are really are beautiful, and they're fragrant and tasty. And so he tells the sons and they'll be rid of suffering and they'll be free from illness. And the sons with sanity took the medicine. Those who lost their sanity, the fumes of medicine spread within them, and they say the medicine is no good, and the father pities them. Now, where have we in 2021 ever heard anything quite like that? This is 2,000 years ago. Some people are refusing medicine. And of course, 2,000 years ago, there were any hypodermic needles. And once again, as we see when we read this sutra, human nature changed all that much. So because of the poison, the minds of the sons are topsy-turvy. And he says they're glad to see me and they want to be cured, but they won't take the medicine. So he realizes I have to use expedient means, which will cause them to take the medicine. So he says, you should know that of old, I am weak, I am old, and I will die soon. So I now leave this good medicine here. You can take it and not worry that it will be ineffective, and it's going to work. So he makes this explanation, and then he went to another land, and he dispatches a messenger to say, your father is dead. And so when the sons hear this, they feel that their father's turned his back on them and he died, and their hearts are sorely distressed. And they give rise to the following thought. If our father were here, he'd be compassionate to us and would have seen to our recovery. Now he's abandoned us and died in a foreign land. And they feel like they're unprotected orphans with no one to rely on. course, they're the ones who got themselves in this, we think. So this grief that they're feeling, they get in touch with it and they wake up. And then they knew that the medicine was very good, color difference. So they took it and the poison sickness was alleviated. The father, hearing that they recovered, quickly returned home so his sons could see him. And it says, this was no lie. Now we can think of how we understand that story and if we believe it. And I can't even imagine what it would be like if the had not died, and what it would be like with social media right now. It's actually beyond my ability to believe. So we know actually for a fact that the understanding that the Buddha passed away and that his teachings were then revered and followed, and that great teachers and Sangha arose really around the teachings, and they drew other followers. We can see that it actually worked, and the Buddha's expedient means were as efficacious as possible, given the intractability of some of us who often don't listen to reason. So now we can, oh, and then I just have to mention briefly the chapter 17. Now, interestingly enough, when people summarize this, they give it very short shrift, because this chapter explains the benefits of believing that the Buddha didn't die, that the Buddha is still in the world. He did not go into extinction. So once again, I mentioned this before, in one sense, this is the most exciting news, that from this kind of belief and the power of our own Buddha nature, we could achieve an understanding, and there's a short list that we'd understand the non-arising of all things. We would, in other words, see the nature of our deluded minds and not get caught up in it, see the world as it actually is. We would learn great incantations which would have incalculable use, and we would gain eloquence and unhindered speech, and the ability to turn the Dharma wheel. And then this list, we would get awakening after 8 births, 4 births, 2 births, one birth, or get the aspiration to supreme Buddhahood. And we would see true suchness as it really is. And this, for some reason, it's halfway through chapter 17 is the end of that cycle of the Buddha announcing that he has not gone into extinction. There's just a page or two more in that chapter, which pretty much reiterates what was said, and but that's said by the Buddha, up until I told you was pronounced by Maitreya. So now let's look and make from what we've learned from this chapter. One of the things that starts to emerge, understanding, is the emergence of the bodhisattvas under the earth. What's our understanding of them? Why did the Buddha reject the offer of the bodhisattvas who had come here from other lands? Well, there are explanations. One, those bodhisattvas had their worlds to attend to. Two, that the bodhisattvas that the Buddha had trained for years really understood our world and could be most efficacious. And another symbolic understanding is that the earth and the space around it can represent all experience, everything that we encounter, and by extension, our Buddha nature. And so there are many descriptions of how the earth is the mind ground, or sea mind ground, and we haven't really explored it as deeply as we could. And actually, to explain this, I thought that I would use a Zen koan from Case 89 in the Blue Cliff record. And I will hopefully, obviously I'm jumping out of the Lotus Sutra, and I will hope to jump back, but I think that this is relevant because we're really trying to understand what we've been told in the sutra, what's the significance. I mean, just look at it as a narrative, or is it pointing in some direction that we can look towards and gain some for our. So this is a brief interchange between two disciples of Master Sheng Yen, Yun Yen and Daowu. So Yun Yen asked Daowu, how does the Bodhisattva Guanyin use those many hands and eyes? Daowu answered, it's like someone in the middle of the night reaching behind her head for the pillow. Yun Yen said, I understand. Daowu asked, how do you want it? Yun Yen said, all over the body are hands and eyes. Daowu said, that is very well expressed, but it is only 8/10 of the answer. Yun Yen said, how do you say it, elder brother? Daowu said, throughout the body are hands and eyes. So we have this, what's seemingly a core issue in practice and in compassion. So the question is not so much about the hands and the eyes, it's what the hands and eyes of Guanyin do. They hear, they understand, hear, the eyes can hear, one would think, the cries of the world. Guanyin understands suffering, and Guanyin responds to it. So this is really this question of responsiveness. That's really what's what is at the core of it, and the question of compassion. And what is behind these chapters in the Lotus Sutra is the Buddha's compassion and how he is showing it to us in this admittedly abstract way of bodhisattvas arising out of the earth. And one thing I neglected to say, when they do arise out of the earth, all the practitioners here, the whole assembly, they've never seen these bodhisattvas before. So this is really something new, showing us that there are things that are missing, things we haven't quite understood. There's more to go. So when Yun Yen is asking about using these many hands and eyes, it's really how is, well, I can't say what it really is because this is a koan. It's something one could contemplate for many years. In this case, I'm directing it towards how is compassion really exercised? You know, there's some question in Yun Yen's mind, you know, how, and Daowu says that it's like in the middle of the night, reaching behind her head for a pillow, someone doing that. So that this compassion being in our practice no different than wisdom, it is very natural. It arises when our minds are unbound. It arises very naturally. We're no longer doing so much I'm mine, this is mine, that's yours. It's more in a state of non-duality where we're beyond gain and loss. We exercise our compassion. So Yun Yen says, all over the body are hands and eyes. Yun Yen is understanding that the compassion of understanding and the compassion of actually acting are in the body, so to speak. But Dao is going yet another several yards, another 20 yards, if you will, because he said you've only got 8/10 of the answer. He's saying the hands, the body and hands are, I'm sorry, the throughout the body are hands and eyes. And so this is a very difficult concept to convey, but I'm going to do my best. In understanding the space and time that is expressed in these chapters that we're talking about today, Dogen Zenji, who wrote very prolifically about the Lotus Sutra, talks about how and time are not only are they indistinguishable, they're indistinguishable from who we are. So this is a great teaching of non-duality, you know, because when we read things like the Sutra, we think the Bodhisattvas over there, these have come from over here, there's a Buddha from over there, there's the Fourfold Assembly over here. We tend to categorize things. But here, Lotus Sutra is showing this great inclusivity. All beings will reach Buddhahood. Oh, let me read something of what Dogen talked about, the timelessness of the sutra. The Dharma by which living beings emerge from delusion and are led to Buddhahood and Nirvana is designed to extinguish itself completely. So this is what we're seeing. The Dharma is getting extinguished in the Lotus Sutra, and something else is there, but we don't know that it's non-Dharma or Dharma. Beings must volunteer to protect the Dharma. Hence, the words of exhortation, you know, preach this Dharma so that they may strengthen their will to protect it. However, living beings are endowed with the faculty of great enlightenment. All are, without exception, potential bodhisattvas. So in this respect, there's no time when the sutra is not protected. And as I've said earlier, there's no time when the sutra is not operative. And when these events, we tend to think of them as historical events, but they are, they can be understood as growing narratives of our experience, growing understanding. And so the bodhisattvas who've actually come to practice, they're just destroying our normal understanding, our normal conceptuality. So Dao Sheng, who was the first commentator on the sutra, says that the earth refers to the bonds and the instigators of depravities, and living beings endowment for instigators of depravities. But Dogen will differ with that and say these seeming depravities, these seeming vexations that we have, those are not at odds with our enlightenment. It's the way that we approach all of our vexations. And Dao Sheng continues talking about how this is this chapter in the sutra is kind of a mirror for us to see how we interact with phenomena. So I'm also, you know, in my talk, I'm very indebted to a book by Dan Layton called Visions of Awakening, which out these two chapters. And there are so many great teachers who commented on how these chapters can be understood. And so Ron, who was one of the Huayan practitioners, talks about the poetic vision of the phenomenal world as the very locus of awakening, so that we should understand all of these elements as we're encountering the sutra as elements of our own mind. And that Buddha nature is the entire world, land, the land, space, everything. And just to hone in on the space and time aspect, which is really very important for Dogen, just consider how we in the world, we look at space and time as something outside of ourselves, right? So if I say there's some space over here and I move my hand to it, am I pushing space away, or is my hand and space always one and the same? You know, there are no spacetrons, like there are no gravitons. There's nothing that really gets moved, right? Because space, like nirvana, is unconditioned. That is, it's not created out of anything. It can't be labeled, and it's never destroyed. It doesn't really have existence. By the same token, time is really not what we think it is. So if you think about planning a trip to Europe in a month, and then you do a few other things, and it's 5 minutes later, that thought about the future has now become the past. And if you think about something that happened 20 or 30 years ago, if you happen to be that old, then that past is now in the present. So this feeling that we have of where we are in time is really something of an illusion, and goes on to say that we are time beings, that we're not distinguishable from it. Now, I know that this is quite complicated and profound, and but it's worth contemplating. And what I really like to try to do in these talks is to engender some enthusiasm for actually going back and contemplating some of the things that we've talked about. So I want to say, so another great teacher, Ryokan, said that emptiness, it's a Japanese Soto priest from the 18th century, emptiness can be grasped and the wind may be tied down, but the lifespan of the Tathagata cannot be fathomed. Although he constantly abides on Vulture Peak expounding Dharma, he dares not let people observe him easily. Many people have really looked into this matter in great depth and tried to understand it, and also tried to see the benefits of the teaching, the expansiveness that the Lotus Sutra is showing us, how we don't have to be tied down to any of our preconceived notions. And then Shunro Suzuki in the last sentence said, if this story, you will not understand it properly. This sutra is told in various ways, back and forth. It's sometimes this way and sometimes the other way. That is why the sutra is valuable. And he says that it really lends itself to artistic or poetic understanding. And as many of you may know, the Lotus Sutra has an enormous body of works that have surrounded it, from various stories of miracles to plays, to an enormous body of paintings, all built around the Lotus Sutra. And I know I'm getting close to the end, and let me leave you with something also not that easy to understand, but I think it points into a direction that we can look at. You know, anyone who wants to take on the Lotus Sutra, right? Because go out, Lotus Sutra, the Buddha is saying how hard it is to understand and how it could bring about resentment or all sorts of negative feelings towards it, which is certainly not what I want to do. I'm trying to really go into it in great depth and see how it affects me and how it affects you. So Dogen Zenji has an essay called "The Dharma Flower Turns the Dharma Flower." Mind is in delusion, the flower of Dharma turns. When the mind is in realization, we turn the flower of Dharma. And the largest container of that, which is mind itself, is that the Dharma flower turns the Dharma flower. And I believe this is Dogen's vision of absolute non-duality, no separation between us and others, between us and time, between us and space, between us and Buddhahood. And this is something I, as usual, have a lot more material, but I don't want to run over like I did last week. And so I think I'm going to stop and just give the closing verses, and then perhaps we can discussion. So, may the virtuous merits adorn and purify the pure land of the Buddhas. Upwardly, we raise the gratitude, we alleviate the suffering of the three destinies. May those who see and hear the Dharma generate Bodhi mind, exhausting this body of retribution, be reborn in the land of extreme bliss. So thank you all.
Thank you, Harry. It's almost a time, but do you want to take on one question? Just see if the audience have a question.
Oh, sir, yeah.
Yeah, if anyone have a question, you can raise your hand, and our volunteer will unmute you. And if no one has questions, we're just going to conclude today.
It's a lot to take. It's a lot to take in, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So it really goes in so many different directions, these three chapters, and I really didn't see any way of not mentioning them as a whole, because it really is a great turn in the sutra and a great turn in the Dharma. So yeah, nobody has any questions, we can certainly conclude. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, everyone can unmute and speak. Okay. I guess we have a lot to absorb in. So.
Oh, I think Angela has a question.
Yeah, Angela Yuan, please go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you. Give me this opportunity to raise a question. I just want to know a person who really have no dualism. So what would be like? Or could you give us more details about
living well, Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi is one of the things that does not appear on my resume. So I have a lot of meditative experience. One thing that that sort of can simplify comes from enlightenment, that to see the arising of the to see the arising mind, that ability is is in the domain of the non-arising mind. What we're talking about, the non-arising mind, is not the non-dualistic mind. It is not swayed by what comes in through the senses. Someone in that state is living, but they no longer have a sense of self. They only have a sense of like arranging your pillow in the middle of the night. Their actions all flow very naturally. They're without vexation, without problems or challenges or even pain. It's how they encounter them and how they respond rather than react. And that is that's the nature. The people in the Lotus Sutra, the Arhats, have done much more to learn, have had some taste of that. But what they haven't gotten is compassion and understanding of how they can help other beings. They haven't really opened themselves up to the entire universe, encompassing all space and time, all realms. I don't know how much more I can go into what the world of non-duality is like. It's certainly worth striving. And as the Lotus Sutra says, this is our birthright. This is something really within us. We don't have to go elsewhere. It is mind itself, and we, because of our eons of conditioning and karma and a variety of reasons, have been we have sort of blinders on our eyes, and we're seeing the world in a very distorted, filtered way. Being in the world of non-duality takes those blinders and removes them. You see the world as it is. And that's why we're here. We're and of the causality, we're all here. The cause for us being here, the Buddha and the Buddha's teachings. Working all is in a variety of ways that are much greater than our normal perception. And as we practice, we open up in many, many different ways and expand our awareness, so that one day that's where we're going. That's what the sutra says. And faith in that is really important, because obviously we don't always feel like that. We don't always feel like we're on top of the world. We feel like we're under the world. And then in a non-dualistic mode, you're not on top, you're not inside, you're not below the world, or you're living in the present moment, which comprises all space and all time. So, let's keep on practicing.